Welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by ISO TC283. For those of you I haven't met before, my name's Lachine Humphreys. I work for the British Standards Institution, BSI, and on behalf of the UK, I'm the committee manager to ISO TC283. We will have time for Q&A at the end of this session. So at this stage, obviously, we would very much welcome your questions and your input. So please put up your hand using the usual Zoom functions if you wish to ask a question. So in a moment, I will hand over to Martin Cottam, the current chair of ISO TC283, for some opening remarks. He'll then hand over to our chair-elect, Liani Dutoit, who will welcome us to today's session and pass us on to another member of our TC283 leadership team, Professor Kat Riak, who is also the convener of Working Group 10 and responsible for this piece of work. Kat will give us a short presentation, an overview of ISO 45010, and then she will introduce our panel. We have 4 panelists joining us today from Working Group 10, who will go through some questions moderated by Liani. And then finally, we will get into an audience Q&A at the end of the session. We'll hopefully have about 20 minutes for that before we close the session at 1:30 UTC. So we've got about 90 minutes scheduled today. So with that is everything from me, and I will hand over to our TC283 chair, Martin Cottam. Thanks very much, Martin.
Lockie, thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Welcome to this session, and thank you for joining. And I hope you're going to find this a very useful and informative session, and that it will trigger some good discussion when we get through to the Q&A part. So thanks for being here. I wanted to begin, if I could have my next slide, please, Lockie, with just some remarks about why this standard, ISO 45010, is so important. I think it's really valuable if all of us can feel confident in communicating this to our networks and our colleagues and our organizations, comfortable and confident talking about the importance of this standard. In the development of the standard, we've received a lot of positive comments from around the world, which suggests that there is a lot of enthusiasm for this document and indeed a lot of recognition of its importance. But there have been some exceptions. We have received a small number of comments saying, we don't know why you're producing this document. It shouldn't be produced. Or if this document is to exist, it's got nothing to do with occupational health and safety and shouldn't form part of the ISO 45000 series. And we don't agree with those views in any way. And our commitment to this standard within ISO TC283 is absolutely rock solid. We see this as a central part of occupational health and safety. It's clear we have a communication job to do here, I think, colleagues, because there isn't perhaps the universal acceptance of the need for this standard that we've seen with much of the other work that's gone on within TC283 over the last 7 years. So why is this standard so important? Well, first of all, I think it addresses, or it's a contribution to addressing, a historic gender imbalance in the whole field of occupational health and safety. Perhaps the example of that we're all most familiar with is in relation to PPE, personal protective equipment, where for decades, PPE put onto the market has been designed purely around the proportions of the male body. And that has left female colleagues often having to try and adapt to PPE, which simply doesn't fit them, and therefore provides inferior protection and leaves them at greater risk, and is also uncomfortable and can be a cause of stress and distraction. And so female colleagues have been effectively the poor relations subject to unequal levels of protection. And that's also mirrored in some other areas of occupational health and safety too. The derivation of chemical exposure limits is predominantly, or was predominantly, based on studies carried out based on the male anatomy. And you can also argue then that gender-specific health issues are perhaps the third and final example of where a historic gender imbalance has prevailed in occupational health and safety. Now, within TC283, we have certainly been on the journey in terms of the messaging that our standards deliver, mirrored by many other organizations, in recognizing that one of the key elements of successful occupational health and safety is to have a system which is capable of addressing the full diversity of an organization's workforce, whether that's in relation to gender or any other aspect of diversity, and that a one-size-fits-all approach to occupational health and safety inevitably leaves some people at a disadvantage. So addressing gender-specific health issues is just one dimension of moving away from a one-size-fits-all OHS approach to one which is tailored to and takes account of the full workforce diversity. And of course, in the case of this standard, it's also very much part of the enactment of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5 around gender equality. Just as ill-fitting PPE means that female workers are subject to inferior protection and therefore don't enjoy gender equality in terms of health and safety protection, well, so it is if we choose to ignore gender-specific health issues. So that's one reason why we might want to address this, but there are other reasons. And another one is frankly just economic or commercial, which is that failing to address the issues that female workers face in relation to menstruation, menstrual health and menopause in the workplace can lead to an expensive loss of female talent from the workforce. In some cases, of course, it means workers may leave the workforce at the point when they are potentially of greatest value and have the greatest amount to offer to their organizations. And that's explored in an article there for which you can see the hyperlink, which you'll be able to follow when the slides are distributed, to a piece of research work that BSI carried out, actually quantifying the extent to which this loss of female talent occurs in the workforce when issues such as those described in ISO 45010 are not properly addressed. And you may also be interested in an article for which there's also a hyperlink on the slide on the TC283 website, where I talk a bit more about the case for ISO 45010. Now, bear in mind, if you would, colleagues, that the creation of a new standard can help to shine a spotlight on an issue such as this. It can legitimize discussion about historical taboo issues. We saw that with ISO 45003 on psychological health, safety and well-being, published in 2021. It was a contribution to encouraging and legitimizing conversations in organizations about a topic that people had been reluctant to talk about. And the existence of a standard can also help to signal to the top management of organizations that here is a topic that should be on their agenda. And we've seen that with other standards, and I sincerely hope that the publication of ISO 45010 will have all those effects in spotlighting this issue and raising its profile. So I ask you all, please advocate for this standard. We have a job of communication to do, I think, to persuade some people of its relevance, of its importance. And the sooner we work on that journey, the better. And I'd make that request in particular, perhaps, to the men in the audience with us today. We are all affected by this issue, and that includes men. If you are managing a team with female colleagues, this is an issue of which you need to be aware, you need to have an understanding, and you need to be confident in dealing with it. And equally, for all of us as human beings, If we're men, we undoubtedly want the best outcome for wives, partners, daughters, whose experience in the workplace may be significantly affected by whether the organization they work for is addressing these issues. And I think when the message is delivered by men, although it's the same message that we would all deliver about the importance of this standard, but I think when it's delivered by men, it can have a different impact within the workplace, and therefore male advocacy for this standard is very important, alongside, of course, the advocacy of all the female colleagues as well. So that really concludes my opening remarks. I hope it's reinforced your conviction as to the importance of this standard, and I hope it's motivated you to be part of a movement to publicise this standard and the importance of the issues that it's addressing. So thank you for your attention, and I'll pass over now to Liani, who is going to lead the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you for that opening remarks. And certainly a warm welcome to everyone that is joining us today. It is a pleasure to be as moderator and to support this important conversation on menstrual and menopause health in the workplace. This is a topic that touches so many lives, yet has often been overlooked. And today marks an important step in changing that narrative. With that, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Professor Kathleen Rioch, our Working Group 10 convener, who will share a little bit more on the origins and ambitions of ISO 45010. Thank you very much, Dr. Kathleen. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Liani, and thank you to Martin. I think it's really important to note here that both Martin and Liana have been really strong advocates for the development of this standard, and also the standard being based within the family of health and safety suite of standards. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about why that's particularly important in this current contemporary social and economic climate as well. So thank you to both of you. So I'm the WG10 convener. We're developing the standard on menopause, menstruation, and menstrual health. We work very much as a team with a great, fantastic committee that hope to work towards a consensus-driven guideline around what great support for menstruation, menopause, and menstrual health looks like in our workplaces. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk for about 10-12 minutes, just thinking about the origins of why this is important, why this is timely. I'm then going to go in terms of the scope of the particular standard, and then hopefully some of the ambitions before leading into a panel with some of our great members here. As Lachy said, please feel free to post your questions or your comments in the chat, and we'll be very happy to visit them later on in this session. So really starting off, why now? So whilst we know that there's been a groundswell of attention and awareness around menopause and menstrual health in society in general, we know that this is really uneven and unequal. So we know that there are some parts in the world who are further on in the journey in terms of that awareness and that literacy around menopause and menstrual health. We also know that there are others who are behind, but most importantly, we also know that there are particular dynamics that are happening in the world or geopolitically that are actually taking us back from a position of neutrality in this. So I think at the moment it's a really timely and interesting time to start thinking about this, and really important in terms of what a standard can provide in terms of being expert-driven and evidence-based around what works best to help support employees in the workplace. So as you can see from this kind of this slide, there's a mosaic of different things happening in the world that really have both a push and pull factor in terms of why we would support them in the workplace, in terms of helping secure engaged, successful and ambitious workforce, but also some of the kind of pains that come when we don't pay attention to these issues. And that can be reputational, it can be economic, it can be related to productivity as well. So next slide. Now, I'm very aware from some of the main... Oh, I think, Ellen, if you could just mute, that'd be great, thank you. So I'm very aware from the people I can see on the joining the call that some of you are probably more expert on menopause and menstrual health than myself. But I think it's really useful thinking about this as part of a movement to make sure we have an awareness and education about menopause and menstrual health. So I thought it'd be useful just to kind of think about where we're coming from around this. Now, menopause, we know around 25 million women pass through menopause each year. Menopause, formally speaking, is understood as the 1 year anniversary from your last period. That's usually how it's broadly defined. But actually, the term menopause is usually used to describe the time of life or the time of experience that describes perimenopause, the run-up to that 1 year anniversary, and postmenopause at the time after that 1 year anniversary. Now, in terms of the workplace, figures differ in terms of geographical area, but roughly it's accepted that around 10% of women consider leaving the workforce due to symptoms. However, we know counter to that a vast majority of women can actually work through menopause, especially, and this is really the crux of where we're coming from in this standard, especially if supported in the workplace. And what we really want to see is that there's a change from thinking about problematic symptoms towards enabling and supportive environments that allow women to thrive and work through menopause whilst working in whatever capacity they feel they can. Now, menopause is what we see as almost a constellation of symptoms. So it's a variety of different symptoms and health experiences, and they also change over time. So someone experiencing, for example, hot flushes or hot flashes at one point, this may actually change over time as they progress through that menopausal transition. We do know that different symptoms are more stigmatizing and debilitating than others. And we also know that some symptoms are exacerbated more by being in certain workplaces than others. If we go to the next slide, menstruation, on the other hand, is experienced by over 300 million women every day. We know roughly, in terms of a broad, general ballpark, that around 1 in 10 women have a menstrual-related health condition. That can be, for example, PCOS, fibroids, or endometriosis. Why is this important? Well, on the one hand, we know that menstrual health is vital for economic prosperity, growth, and inclusivity, not just in terms of at a national level, a national jurisdiction, but also in terms of the lives of those women, particularly the kind of financial lives of those women. Unfortunately, we know the current state of play in a vast majority of countries is that menstrual health and menstrual conditions are subject to a rather unholy trinity of underdiagnosis, misdiagnosis, and late diagnosis in healthcare encounters. And what does that mean? Well, underdiagnosis is when a person may go to their healthcare provider discussing significant pain, and it's dismissed by saying, just take a couple of paracetamol or ibuprofen and a hot water bottle, when in fact they may have an underlying condition. Misdiagnosis is when those symptoms are seen as indicative of some other health condition. And we know that there is evidence of women going through quite invasive treatments or diagnostics around, for example, thinking they have cancer or dementia, when in fact it's actually down to some kind of menstrual condition or a menopause transition. And then late diagnosis is when people have to go a number of times, often over a number of years, in order to get a diagnosis. So they've had a number of encounters that can be quite marginalising or dismissive in healthcare, and only to eventually find they have quite a significant diagnosis in order to try and find treatment or support for either menstruation, their menstrual health condition, or menopause. So why is this important to this standard? Well, I think it's really important to say this is not a medical standard, but it's sitting on a kind of broader cultural landscape where we know that underdiagnosis, misdiagnosis, and late diagnosis happen. So we need to make sure that in our workplaces, we create enabling and supportive spaces for people to continue working in the capacity they can. Next slide, please. Now, of course, menstruation and menopause are not homogeneous experiences. They're not, the same for every person going through them. But similarly, the workplace doesn't provide a homogeneous setting for going through it. And I think this is based on some evidence-based research that we did, and this is women's lived experience of menopause and menstruation in the workplace. Now, I'm not going to read through these fantastic insights into employees' lives, but what you can see here is there is a real intimate intersection between their bodily experiences of menopause and menstruation and the workplace setting that they're in. So, for example, Lara talks about, well, in one workplace, she was able to just take some time out. She had some autonomy and freedom to take time out to manage symptoms, but where she currently is, she isn't able to do that. Therefore, she has to actually take a day of sick leave. You can immediately see the kind of economic challenges and consequences of that. And similar, if we turn to Jan, what we see there is that in a particular workplace, because of the gender ratio, she feels that it's difficult to say anything. So and also she's worried of the consequences of saying something. It doesn't provide a safe and affirming place where there can be a solutions-orientated approach to how she can be supported. And then finally, we have Valerie and Hannah, who have very different experiences. Valerie breezed through menopause. I think that's probably the menopause that everyone wants, didn't have to do anything, compared to Hannah, who had quite significant symptoms, particularly with flooding, which is kind of sudden and quite significant bleeding. Now, both Valerie and Hannah were in professional roles, but if we think about the experience of people across the workforce, some of those may be in precarious employment, where they're not able to kind of disclose for fear of retribution, and also those in kind of highly contained or strict and rigid workplaces, where they're not able to go and take some time out to self-manage those symptoms. And I think this is where we're really coming from with this ISO standard. So before I go into what the ISO standard and guidance is and its origins, I thought it's really useful just to kind of briefly, if we go into the next slide, just talk about, for those that are experiencing disruptive menopausal symptoms, what does it actually look like? What are they currently doing? And of course, hopefully what you should see here is that there are immediate health and safety implications for the behaviours if they are not in an environment that supports menopause and menstrual health. So for those experiencing disruptive menopausal and menstrual symptoms, and the way that we classified, this was a national piece of research undertaken in the global north, but the way that we've classified disruptive symptoms are if you feel you have to make a significant change to the way that you work. What's really notable is that there's large instances, 3/4 of people in both cases suppress their symptoms in some way. They try and ignore them in some way. Now, I'm sure everyone on the call or who's listening to this has had some kind of health experience. And usually, whatever that health experience or condition is, if you try and repress it, it's not going to solve it, and it might actually exacerbate it in some way. Because by ignoring it, you're not actually treating it or giving it the The next one to note is that around a fifth are actually changing how they eat and drink at work. And again, clear health and safety implications there. If you have a worker who's working a 12-hour shift and is not drinking enough water, is becoming dehydrated, that's going to have implications, and perhaps significant implications, not just for that individual, but for those around them. There was high degrees of wanting to work from home, but I think what's really important here is that some individuals actually feel that working from home can exacerbate symptoms such as around anxiety-related symptoms. So what we don't want to say is that working from home is the catch-all solution, not mainly because a lot of jobs don't enable this, but also even for those that do, it doesn't also address problems wholesale. And number two, sick leave, but perhaps more concerning, people were actually using their annual leave to try and manage symptoms in some way, which again has challenges in terms of what annual leave should allow our workforce to do in terms of rest and recuperation. And then finally, around 38% in both those experiencing disruptive menopausal and menstrual symptoms were taking over-the-counter medicines, which of course, perhaps in principle may seem sensible, but of course there's in certain restricted settings that might actually not be possible to do. So now we've got that kind of overview of the landscape, the current landscape of menopause and menstrual health in the workplace. I wanted just to turn to where the standard BS 30416 came from. And I think it's really important to note here that the BS 30416 is what we call a kind of seeding document. So this was a British standard that was developed as a set of guidelines, developed over 12 months. There was an expert advisory group, so a variety of people from across research and third sector, private, public, government, so a really rich group. The guidance, as I said, was general, not medical, and advisory, and really emphasised those kind of intersectional and life coach dimensions. I was involved in this. It was also led very competently by Maria Tomlinson, and it's been a really fantastic piece of work, award-winning piece of work. It's still free to download. We'll put the hyperlink in there when you receive the slides later on. As the next slide showed, it's been really successful, BS 30416. It's been downloaded thousands of times. It's been accessed across 138 countries and 6 continents. It was awarded a Standards Award last year, and it's also been adopted by a number of large organisations across retail, communications, and government as well. So really what we've been really fortunate as an ISO committee, because we've had a really wonderful starting place to think about how to develop an international and global standard around menopause and menstrual health. So if we go to the next slide, if we have a quick look about what the current ISO standard is currently being developed and what it looks like. Now, what you can see is that it situates within this broad idea of an inclusive approach. So we are very aware of intersectional disadvantage, where menopause and menstrual health intersect with a variety of gender-based or age-based biases, but also other conditions as well, such as conditions that may be arising from a disability or another health condition as well. We're also very aware of the importance that any approach is evidence-based. And this isn't just about our standard being based on rich and rigorous evidence, but also making sure that what the standard will do will provide a way of organisation showing the value of supporting menopause and menstrual health in the workplace. So we've been very mindful of making sure that we're not just proposing solutions in terms of how to support, but also how to make sure that you can show that support is making a difference to your workplaces, a positive difference to your workplace. And then, of course, we're providing a series of practical actions, and these fall under 4 umbrella terms of looking at the physical aspects of work, what can be changed or there. Oh, there we go. Looking at so we had the physical aspects of work, looking at the policy guidance, if you want to include a policy, where to situate that in the organisation, and where to situate it in relation to other policies and strategies you have, and also making sure that it's a live and active policy. We've also looked at work design, looking carefully in terms of task demands, but also flexible work options that you may wish to provide. And then finally, looking at supportive workplace cultures, thinking about what areas of collective action and responsibility are there, thinking about accountability as being something for everyone, as Martin discussed, but also about the idea that there is a need not simply to celebrate supporting menopause and menstrual health in the workplace, but perhaps also actively challenging stigma and prejudice. So, for example, it's not just about education, it may actually be about a correction and re-education and awareness around menopause and menstrual health in the workplace. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Lachlan. So where are we so far? Well, hopefully that's got you really excited about what's in the policy. As you can see, we started this work formally in June 2024, and following the ISO process. What I would say for those of you who aren't aware of ISO, it's a standard, tried and tested, evidence-based, rigorous process in order to achieve the very best standard we can. So it's followed the standard process. We've had a working draft where we started to work on that original BS 30416 document and thinking very carefully about how to leverage it and develop and evolve it for a global audience. We went through then what's called a committee draft ballot in September, October, where we actually get feedback from the kind of national bodies across the world. We then use that feedback, and that was quite extensive feedback, around 258 quite significant comments. We have a series of meetings and workshops to develop a consensus to how we're going to develop and address these comments. And then we're currently in the really exciting stage of what's called a draft, a DIS, a draft international standard. And we're preparing for the stage just now. So where are we currently just now, if we just go to the next slide? So the DIS, the draft international standard, is a ballot, and it's circulated at a level, which means it goes out to national standards bodies. So, for example, it will go out to standards bodies in each of your countries. And then there is a ballot. Now, the ballot is open for 12 weeks. And what usually happens is that the national standards body will open up and encourage feedback from members of the general public. Anyone is allowed to kind of comment on that draft. The national body will then culminate all that feedback and then feed it into the international standards body. Okay, so what will happen is that our international committee will receive a number of comments from these national standards based on kind of public feedback or feedback from a variety of organisations in their country. Now, we've got further details for those of you who want some bedtime reading around this standard, but what I would say is really, I just wanted to finish with a kind of very quick call to action, because this is the stage, the exciting stage of the standard development, where you get to have a say on this standard. So if you're on a national committee, there may be I know there's some people here who are on a national committee, make sure you're ready to discuss that with your national committee and send in those kind of national standards. And then also, if you're not on a committee, get in touch with your national standards body. You will find details of that on the ISO website and how to do that. And that will allow you to submit your comments through the public comments process. And I would say it is really, really important that we get your comments at this stage. Please do not worry if they are seen as constructive criticism, because really, I think by joining this call, and also I speak on behalf of the committee, what we really want is a robust and rigorous and evidence-based standard that works for all women and people who menstruate out there in the world of work. So please join us in doing that. Thank you very much. Now, it's my pleasure to move on and to move on to the panel section. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by 4 of my fellow committee members here from the working group 10 involved in the menopause, menstruation and menstrual health at work standard. So I'm going to pass over to Liane, who is our chair-elect for ISO TC283. But before I do it, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce them. So first of all, we have Nikolai. So Nikolai Berknai-Svinin, he's a business strategist and entrepreneur dedicated to really defining workplace health and compliance. He's the CEO and co-founder of STO, and he leads the company's transformation, certainly from a femtech startup to an advanced healthcare tech and compliance platform. for businesses. So delighted to have you here, Nikolai. Next we have Florence Owatembe. She's a gender mainstreaming specialist at the Rwanda Standards Board with over 15 years of experience in standardisation, trade and metrology. She's a master's candidate in economics, and she specialises, lucky for us, in gender responsive standards, policies, training and mentorship, promoting women's economic empowerment and accountability in standardisation, conformity assessment and metrology. Next we have Dr. Jennifer Chan Dalalvia. She's a political scientist with a focus on gender, intersectionality and diversity in organisations. She researches menopause, is certified as a menopause doula, and is personally affected by early menopause as well. So really bringing that valuable lived experience to our committee. She co-authored Menopause at Work, which is a pioneering German book. I'm sure many of you have heard about it, that promotes inclusive and progressive workplace corporate health strategies. And finally, but definitely not least, we have Jess Straight. Jess is the Global Advocacy Manager at Days for Girls International, which is a non-profit that's reached around 3.5 million people with menstrual care and education, a fantastic organisation. She manages US-focused advocacy and research, youth programmes, and supports the Period Positive Workplace Initiative. And Jess holds a BS in Data Science from Penn State. And so a really fantastic group reflecting the diversity of expertise that we have in WG10. So with that, I thank you very much for joining us, and I pass over to Liani.
Thank you very much, Kathleen, and certainly thank you very much to our panelists as well. Thank you for joining us today and for the important contributions that you've made to the work so far. So to start us off with, I would like to explore one of the core challenges we are here to address. So the first question is for the group, and I would really value hearing from at least two of you on this. So to get into the first question, in your region, what do you think is the biggest barriers, or what do you think the biggest barriers are to addressing menopause and menstrual health in the workplace? And for this very first question, Dr. Jennifer, perhaps you could start us off, and then Jess, I would welcome your thoughts as well. So over to you, Dr. Jennifer.
Hi, good morning. I'm in Mexico, sorry, so a big time difference. Can you see me? Can you hear me? And shall I turn on my camera, or is it okay to not do it?
If you can turn your camera on, it will be great, please. We can hear you, but it would be nice to see you.
Okay, so good morning again. And I'm very happy to get this question because, first of all, on a personal note or an individual societal way, the biggest thing we have is that the tema is still taboo in Germany. So, and it's a taboo because women are not talking about it, and so we're not having conversations at large in the society about it. This also has to do with a lack of knowledge from the women themselves and also from the medical professionals in terms of the subject of menopause, at least. I'm talking about menopause because that's my theme of research. But so that's generally the theme is still clouded in unawareness, lack of knowledge, and also a taboo about discussing menstrual health issues in public. And when we go to the workplace discussions, we have some numbers. We have started to gather numbers here in Germany about this subject. And we asked companies why are they not addressing this subject, and it was very interesting because the number one reason is that they still see it as a private topic, and second one was that there was not awareness about the issue still, and the third one was that they didn't have knowledge about what to do about it. And so for me, this is very important to see why such initiatives as this one are so crucial in order to address exactly these issues that I'm raising. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for that very insightful input. I'm going to pass over to Jess. Your input is also definitely welcome, and your thoughts, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the presenters so far, and a special shout out to all the folks on the call today. We're talking about menstruation is not a normal part of your workday, and we really appreciate you being here and tuning in. I'm based in the United States, and we have a little bit of a unique political landscape at the moment, especially with respect to diversity and inclusion. And so I think for workplaces, particularly in the private sector, there is a fear or reluctance to approach anything that could be interpreted as an inclusivity-based issue at the moment. And so I think our challenge is going to be to position this topic of menstrual and menopause health as being about health and ultimately that workplace success of employees. So showing that it's not just a DEI initiative, which is politically charged in the US right now and is something private sector is shying away from, but framing this issue as an imperative to ensure that employees who menstruate, they're not experiencing undue absences or barrier to their productivity in their careers. I mean, we've seen from the data that those are consequences of things that happen when this issue goes unaddressed. We know there's real and serious health risks to employees when their menstrual health is not being addressed. And that can range from poor mental health outcomes to increased risk of infection. Someone in the chat mentioned access to menstrual products is a really simple intervention that sometimes is just not going implemented because of that political charge around anything focused on inclusivity at the moment. And so I feel that framing this topic as a public health issue, which it is absolutely a public health issue, is going to be top priority to make this issue more accessible for private sectors in my context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to both of you. That was really very insightful. I would like to also hear from maybe some of the other panelists, maybe Nikolai or Florence. Is there anything you would like to add before we move on to the next question?
Thank you very much. My name is Florence Watwembi from Rwanda Standards Board. Normally for this in our region, we have some barriers that can cause not addressing this menopause and the menstrual health in the workplace. For example, it's like a culture taboo and stigma for this menopause. It's like the people are not openly to say that they have these symptoms at workplace. Even this menstrual health also it's an issue. But these days in Rwanda, so it's like we have in the law that they consider the menstrual health at in workplace. We normally have to avail this product that can help, but it's an issue is that people to be open because of this culture taboo and the stigma, lack of awareness that have been also an issue because some leadership position they have to be engaged within this to address this menopause and the menstrual health, but it is still lack of training and awareness to them that to take this issue as not an individual issue, but we have to consider them. Another aspect that is like barriers for is insufficient policies that can address specifically for the menopause in our region is an issue in Rwanda, also in other African countries, because they did not consider this, they didn't see as a the overall issue to everyone. They take it as easy as individual issues. So means that we have to put in place policies also that can complement to these issues of menopause and menstrual health. Thank you very much. This is my contribution to you.
Thank you very much, Florence. One last call before I move on.
Yeah, well, I could just add, now being located in the Nordics, so I think we see some of the same tendencies. We do have a strong tradition for both equality and progressive workplace policies, but despite that, I believe that the biggest barriers are often the invisible ones with we've heard it already, persistent cultural taboos and insufficient awareness, lack of knowledge. So, and this is why I believe the standard is actually taking place. There is many employers underestimate the real impact that menstrual and menopausal health has on productivity and employee well-being, satisfaction, overall health, sick leave, just to mention a few things. So I believe that part of the answer will be talking about it more, and I believe that that barrier will break down by having these kind of discussions as we are doing now. So I think that's a great move in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. Now we've heard, I will pass on to Orpa just momentarily before we move to the next question. Orpa, is your question, is it something that can wait to the end, or is it something that you would need to ask right now? If you can put your question in the chat for us, Orpa, and then we'll circle back. So we will circle back to your question when we are finished with the panelist questions. Thank you very much. Now, I've heard, obviously, Nikolai, you've mentioned a few barriers, and Florence, you've also mentioned a few barriers there. So thank you very much for that. Now, our next question, Lockie, if we can move over. Thinking about those barriers, how do you imagine the standard will help overcome those barriers? And for this question, I would want to go to Florence first. So Florence, I'd love to hear, and I'd love to bring you in to this question first. How do you see the standard making a difference? And then Jess, I'm going to pull you back in after that. Perhaps if you can follow with your thoughts for me as well, please.
Thank you very much. How do you, can I imagine how this standard is the useful tool to overcome those barriers? For example, the standard will bring this silence, because through the awareness in workplace, we need to have this, to do the awareness regarding to this standard, means that this silence will be breaking because of that, and also reducing this, as I said before, this stigma. Also, with this standard will engage leadership within the organization to make sure that there is a presence, because many organizations have those people, women and girls, that facing the symptoms of this menopause and menstrual health. But I make sure that when we're raising awareness to the leadership, they make sure that they have to consider the people that we have, but they have the knowledge to contribute to the organization. Also, the productivity will increase for that, because if they have the safety at workplace, they feel safety, or when they have the facilities for them. For example, for this menopause, when they put in place, the rest room for them when they feel uncomfortable, because we know some symptoms, there is the temperature, high temperature, there is a room for them to have to take a bath, maybe at workplace. They have to work hard and make sure there is no abstinence at workplace. Also, a turnover for employees, because if you don't feel comfortable you not feel comfortable at workplace, it means you have to resign for the work. Economically at home is an issue. Also, another thing, some of them, they took this early to resign the work before the designed years. It's early retirement for it. Means that there is an issue for that. This standard really will help for that. Also, there is an improvement in infrastructure, because some institution does not consider that to make availability of this, for example, this sanitary pads at workplace, because if it is a menstrual period, for example, if there is no this sanitary pads at workplace, means that you have to go to buy them outside of the work, you have to go home. Well, you see, that means the productivity within the organization, because the working hours should be reduced. Also for the leaves, if you have some symptoms, if we engage leadership, really they will have the policy in place to support them. Means that this standard really have detailed the importance of this to support this women in menopause and the girls in the, this menstrual health. So it means that the policies should be there, but awareness for the policies also to be implemented for change and transformation will be really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Florence. Jess, over to you.
Thank you. I think I'm going to echo a lot of similar sentiments about awareness, but that barrier I highlighted in the US was related to placement of the issue. I think in the US context, it's been really heavily framed as a gender equality topic, which it does fit there. But that placement can be prohibitive to private sector conversations. And so even Martin mentioned at the beginning of this session that we're not going to see movement on this piece of employee health if only half of the workforce feels that they're able to be part of the dialogue or even feels that there's a space for them within the dialogue. And so I'm hopeful that the placement of this standard specifically under occupational health and safety is going to shift the perception of this topic from that women's issue to a workplace issue. And I do think that will welcome other voices to the table that have not previously been part of the conversation. I think there are folks on this call today who've not been part of this conversation before now. And I have a colleague, I don't think she's on this call, but she's in ISO TC283. And she has a phrase that I really like, which is, it's maleness, not malice in the past, right? So meaning that the omission of menstrual health or menopause health has not necessarily been due to a lack of willingness to address this topic in the workplace or elsewhere, but it's because of a lack of awareness, it's a lack of literacy, it's just something that hasn't been brought up in those rooms or on these tables before now. And so I'm optimistic that this standard is going to reposition the issue where I feel it should be, which is within that broader picture of healthful work environments without specifically gender-based risks to employee health and safety. And so I'm hopeful that this standard will help with that issue. Thank you.
Thank you much, Jess. I'm just going to open the floor to any of the other panelists. If anybody wanted to add something before we move on.
I would like to, because I think there's two things, or two levels at this. This document is so important. The first one is a symbolic one, because we get asked a lot, is this really, at least in Germany, this is like the discussion right now, is this really our issue coming from the workplaces? And so this sends a symbolic, a very clear message. Yes, this is a workplace issue, and yes, you are to do something about this. And on the other hand, the second question we always get is, what do I do? And the document also provides a very clear, very practical suggestions that are very valuable. So I think there's these two dimensions in which is very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that insight. And certainly it gives, hopefully, listeners on this webinar today good insights as to how this standard will help to overcome those barriers. A lot of good information from both Jess and from Florence as well. So thank you very much for your thoughts on that. Thank you, Lockie. Can we move on to slide number 3, please? So, as the slide suggests, in Working Group 10, we have a range of committee members from different occupations, expertise, and countries. And just to sort of quantify that, there's 57 working group members, which represents 21 countries from public, private, government, healthcare, and many other sectors. And of course, let's please bear this in mind also that this work sits in ISO TC283, which includes 78 participating member countries, 29 observing countries, and 10 liaison organizations. So with this in mind, what have been the benefits or challenges working with such a diverse group? And for this, my first question would be, Nikolai, could you share your expertise first? And then Dr. Jennifer, I'd be interested to hear how that has played out in your work as well. So Nikolai, over to you.
Yeah, well, I would just like to say that for me personally, I think the diversity in the work group has been one of the greatest strengths, clearly. And collaborating with professionals from so many professional backgrounds, cultures, and countries, it's having the different and varied cultural context that has, for me, provided really rich new understanding, nuanced insights that I believe a less diverse group could never have achieved in the same way. So The main challenge, however, that's I think been balancing and integrating all these different perspectives into a clear, practical structure of guidelines that resonates universally. So, and precisely that challenge has ensured what I would say the robustness and global relevance of this new standard.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Dr. Jennifer, over to you.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting to talk about this because I am a Mexican, but I am representing Germany in the working group. So I already bring this diversity with me, and I can see how difficult it is to talk about one single menopause experience and discourse. So in the group, the challenges have been that I think for some of us that are more into the subject, some things are very obvious and are very clear that this needs to be discussed in a certain way. And to hear the contributions from all of the members, it's been really eye-opening to see that certain things are not taken for granted, certain things are not obvious, and certain things are not even better or best done as we think they are. So that's been really, really, it opened a lot of discussions where I didn't think it was necessary at the beginning, and then I realized, oh my God, this is so important. This is so great that we're actually questioning these things that we came bringing as things that were obvious. And in terms of, so that's the challenge and the benefit at the same time. And also something I'm able to recognize is that at least in Germany, where we're at the beginning of this conversation, but maybe further along than some other countries, we tend to focus on a single, when we start talking about the menopause experience, we start focusing on a single experience. And so now that we start with this discussion about the workplace, something we do is we instantly go thinking about women that are working in a desk, that are having a sedentary work, that are managers and have a certain agency about their work life, because these are mostly the people that are involved in the conversation in the beginning in the country. And so something we are trying to do over and over is to integrate this intersectional experience and to try to bring in the experience from other people in other sort of jobs or in other sort of demographic conditions. And sometimes that is really hard when we're having the discussion among people that have very similar experiences. So in order to challenge these narratives from the beginning, I think it's so valuable that the document from the beginning has all this variety of perspectives from different job situations, different demographics, and it's just been really enriching for the whole process.
That's a very comprehensive answer from both Nikolai and Dr. Jennifer. Thank you very much. Before I move on then to our fourth question, I just want to check in with our other two panelists if anybody wanted to have a thought before we move on. Okay. Thank you very much. Lockie, can we move on then to our fourth question? So thinking about the last three questions we've had and all the work that has been done through the working and the drafting of the document or the standard so far, what's been a personal key learning for you through being involved in this process? And for this, I'm going to pass to Florence. Perhaps you could kick us off here, and then Nikolai. I know this is something that you've reflected on too. So if you would like to follow Florence, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. Before starting for the personal key learning for me, really I have this is standard. The process for this is standard. Before these technical members or countries, because we put this standard in our mirror committee, they didn't understand why menopause, because on many of them that we have few women like this. They did not understand why this is standard, why to use this. But when we are in the process providing this comment as in Rwanda, so we try to explain them why. Then they become to understand, then they provide this comment for this standard. A key person learning as me, Florence, for this process of this standard. This shows me how we need to put in our plan within the organization to consider the menopause and the menstruation health when planning, because For example, for the facilitation issues, that means we need the budget for that because we are in the working place environment that needs those facilities. So we have to make sure that during planning, we need to consider, as we consider gender equality within our plans. Another key lesson learned is that to engage stakeholders within the outside organization, inside the organization, that can help us to implement this standard, and awareness from outside our organization, as we are a national standard body, as we have a gender equality standard, we need to put together also occupational health and safety and show this is really a need for the organization to implement this standard. Another thing is a well-being for the organization, within the organization. If someone feels that she is comfortable at workplace, knows that if I'm going to tell my boss that I'm in a period of menstruation, or I have some symptoms of menopause, means that I will feel comfortable at workplace, because we will have many people at our workplace that have those menstrual and menopause health. Means that the key learning for me is to make sure that this standard really has been understood within the planning process of the organization. This is my learning point because it is really relevant at workplace. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, Florence. And I think maybe that will be a learning point for a lot of people as well. So Nikolai, can you reflect for us as well, please?
Yes. So just to give 2 sentences on the background, I started working with this topic from a little bit different angle back in early 2022, when I was invited in to contribute in developing a product, our first product that actually addresses menstrual pain without medication. And it's been a very interesting journey, because I can just say that in early 2022, I did not both know the meaning of, nor could I properly pronounce the word endometriosis. I had no knowledge whatsoever what it was all about. And it's been, I would say, shock upon shock, learning how many who are affected, just to use that example. So I think a key personal learning for me has been to understand how significantly menstrual and menopausal health issues affect workplace dynamics. But if the knowledge and understanding isn't there, it will go under the radar. And that's, I think, what's been going on for so many years, far beyond conventional assumptions, around sick leave or absenteeism or reduced productivity. So I've learned that addressing these issues more openly can really transform, I believe, organizational culture. It can increase trust and dramatically improve employee engagement, satisfaction, and not to mention all the benefits for the workplaces and the employers themselves. So I've learned also, I would say, that participating in this work, I really didn't know what I was getting myself involved in last year, but I would say that this has been really one of the most meaningful and valuable experiences I can think of in a professional setting. I would say that. Thank you.
Thank you much, Nikolai, and certainly really good reflections there from you. Just reflecting back on key learnings and so forth. So then our final question, thank you very much, Lucky, if you can move on to the last slide for us. If there was one thing you hope the standard achieves, what would it be? And for this, I'm going to start off by passing to Jess. I know that this is a point that you feel quite strongly about. What is the one impact you'd like to see? And after Jess, I would like to pass it to Dr. Jennifer, because I'd like to hear your hopes as well. So Jess, over to you.
Sure. I think the thing I'm most excited about is the holistic nature of the guidelines that we've presented here. They go far beyond just work environment interventions to include guidance on things like privacy and disclosure, or the role of managers, or kind of the linkage between hardware interventions. So we've talked in the chat, I've seen comments about menstrual products or washroom facilities, but the linkage between those things and the cultural shift that's really necessary in the workplace as well, where employees will be able to express those unique needs or experiences that we can't account for in a standard, in a space where they feel safe and they don't have fear of repercussions. So we mentioned a bit earlier in my bio working within the Period Positive Workplace Initiative, and we work with organizations that have done those hardware steps often. They already have the products, they have the bathroom, the space is there, but then we hear back from employee feedback that they want managers engaged. They want the men in their workplace to understand. They have a need and desire for those cultural shifts that aren't included within hardware interventions. And so I think this standard does a great job of acknowledging the hardware as the first step. But more importantly, it's laying the foundation for a socially healthy workplace discussion on this topic that's not ostracizing the individuals that do have those special needs or extra asks related to their unique experiences that we can't account for. So to sum it up, I guess it takes everyone on board to break the stigma of this topic, to raise that awareness. And I hope that the standard is going to be able to outline how everyone can be involved in the conversation so they can really see their role clearly, even for the folks that have never been a part of this conversation before. We welcome you in, join us, happy to have you here.
Thank you very much, Jess. And certainly I would echo your thoughts as well. Dr. Jennifer, could you give us your hopes as well, please?
I think it's in the very similar line, but for me, the one thing I would hope is for normalization. Just that this topic becomes a normal part of conversation, a normal part of a discussion that is brought out of the darkness, out of the taboo, and it just becomes something that it is a normal experience for half of the world's population. It should also be a normal discussion and a normal topic to talk about and to analyze from a work perspective.
Thank you very much. And then I will open the floor to our other panelists to see if you would like to give some insights as well. Nicola, I can see you shaking your head, so I'll pass over to you first.
Yes, I would really say I do have a purpose, a goal, and a motivation for being involved in this. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have the inspiration to work with it. But I do certainly hope that the ISO 45010 sets a universal benchmark and over time normalizing menstrual and menopausal health as central issues in workplace, not only well-being, but overall health and OHS policies overall and performance strategies. So ultimately, I'm not only hoping, but I actually expect an ongoing and unstoppable spillover effect, or wave, if you will, that should cause and will cause a wave of awareness within even the educational arena, such as schools, all the way from primary up to university level, within organized sports, and that coming generations will not have even to use the word female or women's health, because it shouldn't be necessary in an evidence-based and equality-based society in the first place, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. And as always, very much appreciated. Now, Florence, I was going to say, Florence, did you want to add anything to Nikolai?
Yes, thank you very much. Something this standard I hope that the standard achieves is how it is going to prevent the workplace discrimination of those women and girls that menstruate or have the symptoms of menopause, because they are going to feel comfortable at the workplace and working safely, economically, and being secure at workplace. This is the achievement of this standard at workplace, preventing discrimination of at workplace. Yeah, thank you very much.
Very insightful. So thank you very much then for this afternoon from the panelists and for sharing your insights, your perspectives and your experiences. It's been incredibly rich and thought-provoking, certainly from my aspect as well. So I'd like to open the floor now to questions. So if you have something that you would like to ask anybody in the panel, please post it in the chat and I'll do my best to see if we can get the panelists to address it. So I am going to, Lucky's going to stop the recording now, and then I will have a look at the chat. There's quite a lot in the chat.